All right, here we go. Good morning.
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 Welcome to Bible study. The Bible study is for Sunday, February 14th, 2021. It's the Transfiguration of our Lord, the last Sunday after Epiphany in year B.
Yay.
So here we are. Why don't we start off with the introduction that we have from Sundays and Seasons. The Sundays after Epiphany begin with Jesus' baptism and end with three disciples' vision of his transfiguration. In Mark's story of Jesus' baptism, apparently only Jesus sees the Spirit descending and hears the words from heaven. But now, Jesus' three closest friends hear the same words naming him God's beloved as believers. Paul writes, "We are enabled to see the God light in Jesus' face because the same God who created light in the first place has shone in our hearts to give us that vision. The light of God's glory in Jesus has enlightened us through baptism and shines in us also for others to see." So here we are. We're going to look at three different texts today. First, we're going to look at a text from 2 Kings, and then the Psalms, and then we'll look at the gospel at the end. So should we start off with 2 Kings?
Sure.
All right.
So the first reading is from 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. Today's, according to Sundays and Seasons, today's reading centers on the transfer of power and authority from the prophet Elijah to Elisha. Their travels, which retrace the path of Joshua back to Moab, the place where Moses died, and the parting of the waters, demonstrate that Elisha and Elijah are legitimate successors of the great prophet Moses. And the text reads, "Now, when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, 'Stay here, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel.' But Elisha said, 'As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you.' So they went down to Bethel. The company of prophets who were in Bethel came out to Elisha and said to him, 'Do you know that today the Lord will take your master away from you?' And he said, 'Yes, I know. Keep silent.' Elijah said to him, Elisha, stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho. But he said, 'As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you.' So they came to Jericho. The company of prophets who were at Jericho drew near to Elisha and said to him, 'Do you not know that today the Lord will take your master away from you?' And he answered, 'Yes, I know. Be silent.' Then Elijah, with a J, said to him, 'Stay here, for the Lord has sent me to the Jordan.' But he said, 'As the Lord lives and as you yourself lives, I will not leave you.' So the two of them went on. 50 men of the company of prophets also went and stood at some distance from them, as they were both standing by the Jordan. Then Elijah took his mantle and rolled it up and struck the water, and the water was parted to one side and to the other until the two of them crossed on dry ground." That sounds familiar. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me what I may do for you before I'm taken from you." Elisha said, "Please let me inherit a double share of your spirit." He responded, "You have asked a hard thing. Yet if you see me as I am being taken from you, it will be granted you. If not, it will not." As they continued walking and talking, a chariot of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them, and Elijah ascended in a whirlwind into heaven. Oh wait, that's a different chariots of fire. Sorry. The chariots of Israel and its horsemen. But when he could no longer see him, he grasped his own clothes and tore them into two pieces. Word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Wow. There's a few repetitions in there. There's a couple of echoes. These may or may not be true, but I hear Ruth and Naomi. I see the Red Sea split in half. And that Chariots of Fire, I don't know, I just go right to the music, and I love that song. So there's that. Transfer of power is the big piece here, right? So a couple of things that I've read as far as the commentaries go is that this transfer of power from Elijah to Elisha is a really big deal. And this mantle, a mantle has been placed upon your shoulders. There's a great, what we wear on Sundays as far as the stoles go, like serves as a mantle. Like this mantle of authority has been placed upon your shoulders. You need to treat it with respect in the office of ministry of word and sacrament, right? So like when I put on a stole, I place that mantle over my shoulders. And that's what I think of. I'm stepping even more publicly into this office of authority with which I am hopefully speaking a word of hope into the world. Here, this idea of all these prophets coming together is pretty extraordinary. That's a large group of prophets. And we remember a few weeks ago, we hadn't heard a whole lot from anybody. And now God sounds like God is speaking a lot more through that context. I read this part about a double portion that was kind of interesting. And this is again from Sundays and Seasons, or not, I'm sorry, Feasting on the Word. It's commentary that we use. And everything about this, and this is a part that I thought was really interesting and extremely helpful, especially when you put it into the context of the gospel, is this idea that this is all relational. No, I'm not going to leave you. You can stay here. No, I'm not going to leave you. You can stay there. No, I'm not going to leave you. So that's like, Elisha is definitely tethered to Elijah and wants to learn everything that he possibly can. And Elisha requests a double portion of Elijah's spirit, not to be twice the prophet that Elijah was, but rather to signify that he is Elijah's true heir, like cementing that. Like, this is really who I am. This is what I've been called to be. I need to follow in the footsteps of. And we have this, Rob Bell did this series a while ago called Pneuma, where he talks about being covered in the dust of Rabbi Jesus. Like, disciples follow rabbis like so closely, and they imitate them so closely that they get covered in the dust of the rabbi. So it's that same sort of an image that I want you to imagine here. Like, Elisha is following Elijah so closely that he is literally like covered in the dust of Elijah, and asking for this to not end just yet, not yet, not yet. And then it's an interesting note that Jordan never shows up as Jordan River. We use Jordan River a lot within the context of the Bible, but our own Reverend Dr. Rebecca Thurman said, no, it's just Jordan everywhere. There's no like river word attached to it. And the Jordan isn't like, it's not like the Mississippi in my backyard. It's not even like the Vermilion in my backyard. It's not a massive gateway of water. And that's not to diminish, him taking his mantle off and placing it down and walking across dry land. It's more, I want you to have the context that it does tend to dry up, and it is not this huge Mississippi kind of metaphor. It's a smaller thing. So in the author here is talking about relationships, and this is Dave Lowe's. So a lot of you might know him. He was on Working Preacher for a while, and now what's the name of his current thing? Preaching the Word? Huh?
He's a pastor now.
He's a pastor, but he still sends out like a weekly thing to pastors for pondering. I can't think of the title of it right now. To be Elijah's heir, as it turns out, means far more than simply to do similar miracles. It is to go wherever the prophet goes, to bear the same burdens, to risk the same hardship, to venture into times of both solitariness and solidarity in order to receive and ultimately bear the word of the Lord. Through this scene, we learn something new about the prophet or at least have our popular conception of prophets thoroughly challenged. To be a prophet is not to be a solitary figure standing at a distance in order to predict the future or call upon the judgment of the Lord. Rather, this is a part that I love, to be a prophet is to enter deeply into the realities and relationships of people to whom you are sent. It is for this reason, perhaps, that the prophet's message is so potent, for it is driven by the anguish of witnessing the disparity between the grand desire of God for God's people and that understanding of that acceptance of God's incredible grace and love and acceptance. They are bound to each other and to Israel and to all of the surrounding nations. So he's not operating in a vacuum. This is for the greater good. This is being passed down. And in another book that I was reading, and if y'all have, I've invoked this name before, but Cynthia Bourgeau is an Episcopalian priest. So is Barbara Brown Taylor. If you haven't read her, she's got amazing stuff out there. I know some of you are longing for a little bit lighter stuff other than like My Grandmother's Hands and some of this heavier material that we've been looking at and we'll be doing a book study on. Barbara Brown Taylor's books are absolutely beautiful. She's an eloquent writer, preacher, also Episcopalian priest. But Cynthia Bourgeau has written a whole bunch of books. And if you already have like audible.com, many of those are free. So The Meaning of Mary Magdalene is free. The Wisdom Jesus is free. I just finished that one. And it also echoes the same sort of relational piece. So at the end of her book, I'm just going to throw this out here because I think in a couple of weeks, we're going to be addressing this in Lent as we enter in. At least I will. I'm not sure what these guys are going to be doing, but one of the pieces is that succession of, we have this 40 days in Lent and Jesus is preparing the disciples all like, I'm going to get going. And they're like, no, don't do it. And then you have the Monday, Thursday, Good Friday of the resurrection on Easter Sunday. And then you have 50 more days of Easter? Pentecost. And then Pentecost transforms the disciples from disciples into apostles. So it moves them from the relational of following the master to being that elevated next person that's going to go out and share the good news in the same manner that Jesus was sharing the good news. So there is a passing of the mantle on Pentecost as well that I think is interesting to highlight within the greater context of the gospel story. And that's what I have for you today. Whew. Any questions, comments? Disputes? Let me know if you think I'm making anything up, because I can.
How about you, Pastor Tanner?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. That story from 2 Kings is one of my favorite. It was my ordination text, and I have a art piece of it in my office. So
where is it?
Right there.
Can you show it?
Chariot of fire and horsemen. I'll put a picture of it in the chat on Sunday.
Okay, cool.
Or on Thursday. But our psalm for this morning is Psalm 50, and it's just the first portion of it, verses 1 through 6. And it goes like this, Psalm 50. The mighty one, God, the Lord, has spoken, calling the earth from the rising of the sun to its setting. Out of Zion, perfect in its beauty, God shines forth in glory. Our God will come and will not keep silence, with a consuming flame before and round about a raging storm. God calls the heavens and the earth from above to witness the judgment of the people. Gather before me my loyal followers, those who have made a covenant with me and sealed it with sacrifice. The heavens declare the rightness of God's cause, for it is God who is judge. So that's that's the first part of Psalm 50. And there are a couple things in this psalm that I think are kind of cool. The first thing you have to know is that this is a 3-part psalm, right? So verses 1 through 6 that we get today are the story of God's arrival, okay? And what we think about this psalm, I mean, we've been talking about the psalms a lot, right? So we know that each of the psalms was written for a specific event or occasion or used in different types of worship. This particular psalm, we believe, was more than likely written to be used at the Festival of Booths. The Festival of Booths was the third and most important of the three festivals in the Jewish calendar, the three pilgrimage festivals. So 3 times a year at Passover, Pentecost, and the Festival of Booths, there was a pilgrimage time to come to Jerusalem, to come to the temple. And this was the third. This was the harvest festival, and folks were supposed to bring in a portion of their harvest as an offering to God at the Festival of Booths. And so we think that this is what it was written for. It was written for this big important festival. And so what you have to imagine here is the beginning of this psalm being read or sung out by a Levitical priest who's standing on the portico of the temple out over this massive crowd of, I mean, just a ton of people, right? And speaking this psalm to this huge assembly of people who have gathered for this festival and to offer sacrifices to God, right? And so these first 6 verses are God's arrival. God is going to come. God is going to come like light, and then God is going to speak. All right. And so those are the 2 big portions of this, the light of God and the word of God, that come out of this particular chunk. So we see in verse 2, God shines forth in glory. And then starting in verse 3, we get all of this language about what it's going to look like when God shows up and the word of God is spoken to the people. And you will note that God's arrival in this text is not happy. It is, in fact, terrifying. Very, very, very terrifying. God is not coming with sorry, my phone thought I was talking to her, apparently. Sorry about that. Anyway, God is going to come and with consuming flame and a raging storm. So not a bunch of wonderful, lovely, happy things, but like chaos and all those fun things. So that's what we get with the word of God here. And so again, you have to imagine this Levitical priest standing out there saying, like, God is going to show up. Get yourselves ready, like now. And then we get these words from God in verse 5: gather before me my loyal followers, or faithful ones, and bring your sacrifices, and the heavens will declare the rightness of God's cause. So that's the chunk of the psalm that we have before us today. But what you also have to know is that the rest of Psalm 50, there's 2 more parts. And in verses 7 through 15, God is going to speak again to these faithful people and basically yell at them for about 7 verses. And then verses 16 through 23, God is going to speak again and yell at everybody who is wicked and ignores the rules of the covenant. And so while this psalm starts out okay, kind of lovely, like with God arriving and the people gathering, it just really tanks very quickly as you keep going. And so I highly recommend that you just read the rest of the psalm. And remember that even as God is calling in God's faithful people, which is what we read today, right? Like God is saying, hey, faithful people, people of the covenant, children, come to me, come and be a part of this. God is calling them in to reprimand them for the ways in which they have failed to uphold the covenant in the last year, basically. And this is what's read every year. It's this reminder that even as we're gathering for worship and gathering to give God praise and bringing our offerings and sacrifices, God also is like, thank you for those things, but I would like to remind you to please do better next year, because you really suck sometimes. And I don't know. That's why I like the Psalms. I'm so excited that we're going to explore the Psalms of Hope as we go into Lent this year and talk about those places of hope. But I think that the Psalms speak to a lot more than that as well. And I think that that's lovely. So there's Psalm 50. That's what I've got for you, Vicar John. God is terrifying. Sometimes people suck, but God does still love us and welcomes us to come and worship.
I love that. And as we'll see in the gospel lesson, this chaos, this wildness, we're going to see a lot of that also here coming up here in Mark. So yeah, what a great connection. So thank you. Should we move on to the gospel? We'll get into Mark chapter 9, verses 2 through 9. Sundays and Seasons says, Mark's gospel presents the Transfiguration as a preview of what would become apparent to Jesus' followers after he rose from the dead. Confused disciples are given a vision of God's glory manifest in the beloved Son. So here we are. Verse 2. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. And then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him. And suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore but Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. The word of the Lord.
Be to
Thanks
God.
be to God. That's like a few weeks now that people have been told to zip it.
Zip it. I know. Interesting, isn't it?
It is.
Zip it for now.
Yeah, for now. Like, but keep silent, like in the King's text too, was like, and to the demons, keep quiet. Come
Right.
out of them. Yeah.
Right. Well, it starts out 6 days later. 6 days later from what? Right? Isn't that 6 days later this event took place?
Is
But-
that like SpongeBob?
Yeah.
6 days later.
I didn't make that connection.
Well, I wouldn't have either because I've never seen SpongeBob, but I did this take, and that's from a kid's message a long time ago.
I like that. Well, 6 days later, many scholars think that refers back to Peter's declaration, Peter's confession at Caesarea Philippi, and Jesus' first passion prediction. But we'll get into that more later, I think. But 6 days later. And the 6 days is interesting. Why would Mark put 6 days in his gospel? We know that Mark's gospel is really short, right? So words matter in this gospel. Words matter a lot in this gospel. So I think we need to pay attention to these 6 days. It's got to be significant. Don't know what it is, but we know that they're going up a mountain. And when we see going up a mountain, we know it's like, pay attention because something's going to happen, right? Something significant is going to happen when Jesus and his disciples or Jesus goes up a mountain. We know, okay, we need to pay attention because something's going on, right? But the 6 days, is that a connection with Moses going up to the mountain in Exodus, where Moses went up the mountain, the cloud covered the mountain, for the glory of the Lord settled in and covered it for 6 days? Don't know, but it's interesting that connection is there. Anyway, we'll get back to that as well. There's so much in this text. I just, preparing for this Bible study and preparing for a sermon on this text, it's almost like it is so rich and thick. It's like goo. I mean, there's just like, you just don't know where to begin, where to stop. But so I'm going to ramble a little bit. So if I become incoherent, please let me know.
Perfect.
Did you cover up your microphone with your papers maybe? Because you were really loud when you were reading it before, and now you're kind of a little bit softer.
Yeah, is that better? I don't know.
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay, I moved them.
You're good.
Okay. Anyway, so here we are. We're going up the mountain. Peter, James, and John, the inner three, once again with Jesus. this is the second time that they're set apart, right? The first time is with the when Jesus raised the daughter of Jairus, right, from the dead. We have these three going with Jesus. And then the next time we see these three going with Jesus will be in the Garden of Gethsemane. So it's interesting. These three are going with Jesus up the mountain. So what happened? In verse 2, when they get up there, Jesus was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, as no one on earth could bleach them. So did either of you two watch the Super Bowl halftime? Did you watch the weekend, the performance? I thought it was really interesting. I mean, there was almost like angels appearing and coming down from the sky. And then all of a sudden, the stage opens wide and there's this dazzling white. And you can't hardly see him, but all of a sudden, oh, there he is, right? The Weeknd appears and he starts singing and the crowd's going wild, right? And there's cheering and it was white. I mean, it was like really white, but and it was kind of fun. But you know what? This wasn't anything like that. There were no crowds cheering. We had disciples petrified. We had disciples terrified because it was so intense. And I think we have this tendency to have in our minds and in our spaces this safe Jesus, right? The safe God that we kind of put like here. And we forget about this wildness and we forget about this chaos, because chaos and wildness are part of this creation. They're part of God. This isn't a safe God. It's a good God. Like, what was it? Was it Mrs. Beaver that said that about Aslan? What do you mean? Is God safe? No, God's not safe. What, are you kidding me? But he's good. And I think we forget about that. I think we forget that these disciples are going up this mountain, and it is not a safe place whatsoever, and they are terrified. And if any of you have ever gone up a mountain, any of you have gone backpacking in a mountain, especially if you're going in for a couple of days, and especially if you're above the tree line, there is nothing safe about that. One wrong move and you're not toast maybe, but you're in trouble. There's too many times that I've seen in backpacking, I'll see a couple people, whatever, they'll be in the backcountry with shorts and tennis shoes and like no water, no food, and it's like, this is not Disneyland, right? This is serious business. And I think we get the same thing when we're looking at the gospel. And I think we get the same thing when we're thinking about the wildness or the chaos, that this is not safe. It's good, but it is not safe, because they were terrified. I think they were used to seeing Jesus with them day in and day out, teaching in the synagogues, traveling, maybe eating with them. Yeah, they saw him do miracles, but this was something completely different. He was transfigured. And the transfiguration story isn't a story that we can explain. What happened on that mountain when Jesus went to what happened on the mountain when Jesus went to pray with them. Why did his clothes become so dazzling white, right? How could Moses or Elijah be there? Was it a dream? Were the disciples all having the same dream? I don't think so, but I think transfiguration really literally means that to change figure or form, and Jesus' appearance was changed, right? And the disciples were terrified. And did he look like an angel? Who knows? Some scholars believe that this resurrection, or this story, is really Mark's resurrection story, right? Because Mark, at the end of the Gospel of Mark, there really is no resurrection story. So some scholars really believe that this truly is the resurrection story. But here on the mountain, Jesus is like blazing light in dreamlike space, talking to those who lived way before. So why? Why the transfiguration, right? Why did he transform, or what was the purpose of it? You know, especially with Moses and Elijah. Was it a connection? I mean, some scholars say it was a connection between the past, a connection and links the past of the law and the prophets, right? And it also links and contrasts. It's interesting. So yeah, I'm not sure, but we have the words. What's really important, I think, is we have the words "listen," right? Echoing the words of Jesus' own baptism, right? It was there that we heard the voice coming down from heaven. But the words at that point, at his baptism, were spoken to him, right? They were spoken to Jesus. You are my son, the beloved. With you I am well pleased. But this time, the voice, God isn't speaking to Jesus. God is speaking to the disciples. This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him. So it's a different angle. So listen to him. And I'm sorry, but every time I don't know why, but every time I vision God speaking from the clouds, and it was my youth, I can't get out of my head Monty Python, and I don't know why, and it's bad, but sorry, I had to put that in there. But let's go back. So he says, listen to him. Many scholars believe that this refers back to Peter's declaration about Jesus, right? In chapter 8. So I want to read a little bit about chapter 8 and Jesus' prediction of where his ministry was heading. So chapter 8 in Mark, verses 27. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, who do people say that I am? And they answered him, John the Baptist, and others, Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets. And he asked him, who do you say that I am? And Peter answered him, you are the Messiah. And he sternly ordered him not to tell anyone about him. There we go. Yep, zip it. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And all this quite openly, Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. And he called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, if any want to become followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. Listen to him. Many scholars believe that this is what he was talking about. So why were the disciples terrified on that mountain? The disciples had every reason to be terrified. This is not what they imagined, right? And this was an extremely pivotal time in Jesus' ministry, going up the mountain here in Transfiguration. Before this, he had been doing his ministry in the Galilean countryside. He'd been healing, he'd been teaching, he'd been preaching in the Galilean countryside. Now he's coming off this mountain, and his sight isn't back on Galilee. His sight now is turned to Jerusalem and what was going to happen in Jerusalem. So this transformation is not only, this transfiguration is not what just happened at Jesus on top of this mountain, but it's also a transforming of where he is headed. He's not headed back down the safe side of that mountain to the Galilean countryside. He's headed back down to a different side of that mountain, headed towards Jerusalem, towards what he was approaching. So I think this transformation, we have to know, or we have to think of, what does that mean for us as well, right? We start out here this Sunday, this last Sunday in Epiphany, we start out on a mountain. Jesus is on the mountain, Transfiguration. The next time we see Jesus on a mountain is Golgotha at the end of Lent. So, is there room in our lives for visions that we can't explain? Have we closed our minds to truth that just absolutely doesn't fit our rational categories, because that's what we have here, right? We have a story that is not about understanding. The disciples see it, but they don't get it. We see it, but I don't think we get it either. So I love this story, and it is so rich, and I have absolutely no idea where I'm going to go with my sermon yet, but I have a little bit of an idea. Anyway, thoughts?
I like it. That's great. I think you've got a lot of stuff there you can pull from for sure.
I think the mountaintop piece is important too. Like when we go up to the mountain, that's usually when there are revelations, like when we have insights about things, but the reality is we live in the valley, you know, the rest of the time. And that I was also thinking about, I don't know if it was Kathleen Norris in the Cloister Walk or if it was another book, but this idea of thin spaces where we can see, you know, through the thin spaces. And in that wisdom literature and in the work with Cynthia Bourgeault and other mystics, there is a transformation of the body that occurs after the resurrection as well. That's really interesting. And that sounds real similar to what you described, like this translucent sort of a being. So it's, I don't know where I'd go with this either right now, because I got so many different thoughts rolling around in my head in preparing for Lent. But there is something about that wisdom, the oneness that is created. And what is it? What was it yesterday, Tanner? We were talking about let it be. What will be, let it be. Like the need to let it be as you have told me, and that echo that we get from Mary also to Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, you know, those same words. I will do what you have told me to do, and let this oneness be one on behalf of all people, not so that I may be glorified, but so that you may be glorified through my actions. So it's gonna be fun. It's not boring. None of this stuff is boring.
Not at all. Not at all.
That sounds great. Do you have any announcements for us?
Don't forget the book study. We're going to start a book study, My Grandmother's Hands, the Tuesday before Ash Wednesday, which is February 16th. It'll
When do you
run.
need people to be signed up? What are you going to do? Cutoff on signups for that?
I don't know if I'm going to cut off signups. I probably should, shouldn't I? Everybody that signs up, what I let them know is we're going to be prepared. We're going to do the first 3 chapters on that first night. But if you don't get a chance to read the first 3 chapters, show up regardless, because we'll still learn. We have probably over 20 people signed up already for 6 weeks, and we'll go through the book. Just amazing content in that book. So yeah, book study.
Nice.
What about Sundays after worship service in Lent? You want to talk about that?
Sure. On the 21st, which is the first Sunday in Lent, we're going to offer coffee hour. You have to bring your own donut and your own coffee, and you need to stay at home. But you can join us in a Zoom room following worship during Lent. So for 6 weeks, we're going to try to allow for a space for us to simply visit a little bit with some intention, but not real heavy, mostly to see how everybody's doing. It's I'm calling this a time of COVID fatigue, where people are really missing each other. And here in Minnesota, on the day that we are recording this, which is February 9th, for the Bible study on February 11th, and then consequently the Sunday of the 14th. It's so cold. My dogs don't even want to go outside and see anybody. It is so cold up here. Like they're only supposed to be out there for like a minute or two, and they come in like standing on one paw at a time. So it's brutal. And I think people are feeling like, oh man, now I can't even get out of my house because it's so cold. Up until now, people have been able to go for long walks or walk with friends or whatever. So no drive-through this Wednesday. even though it's Thursday that you're watching it, might not be. So just remember, it's like when it's at freezing at 5 o'clock on Wednesdays, we can't offer that up. Although there may
Yep.
be a different plan for Ash Wednesday. So pay attention to the Facebook page and our website and the different platforms that we use for upcoming announcements about those events coming up.
Yeah, so don't forget, I mean, you heard the announcements on Sunday, but we'll be offering imposition of ashes on Wednesday, the 17th, on Ash Wednesday. There'll be worship at 6 o'clock on Wednesday night online. So join us for virtual worship there. But we'll be doing some drive-through imposition of ashes, but there'll be some temperature dependent stuff on there, and there'll be an official post on the Facebook page that Wednesday, probably. So look for that information as we go. But we're hoping that we can gather some of that stuff or offer that as you walk through or as you drive through.
But if it's 22 below,
Not if it's 22 below, but perhaps if it's 22 above. So we'll give you those details as we go getting into that next week. And then just a reminder that then Wednesdays throughout Lent from the 17th on, we'll be gathering at 6 o'clock for worship around Holden Evening Prayer and these Psalms of Hope. And that'll be on YouTube and on Facebook. And we're excited to welcome some guest preachers with us as we move through our Lenten season. So look for that as we go as well.
awesome.
All right.
Anything else? If you need something, let us know. If you want a conversation with the pastor or vicar, let us know. If you need to talk to the parish nurse, we can connect you with one. You're not alone. I know it has been exhausting at times for many of you, but keep the faith and be the dedicated people that you are to be the hands and feet of God 6 feet apart. Show up, do good, be kind, as the sweatshirt reads that I'm looking at in the tiny box.
All right.
Cool.
Blessings, everybody. Have yourselves a great week. We'll see you on Sunday.
Thank you.
Cool.